Welcome to my session, How to Win the IoT Rat Race, a guide to understanding IoT concepts and applications. So how many of you are looking at or trying IoT devices within your facility? So there are all sorts of devices coming online, and it's good that some people are using them. I'd like to tell you that this is rocket science. It isn't. Did you scan yourselves in back there? That's an IoT device. It's a scanner hooked up to something that's sending a signal somewhere else. It's no big deal. What are you using, sir? I'm sorry. YoLink, okay. So my name's Peter Costanzo. I've been in the FM industry for about 20 years. Before I got involved in this, I was in electronics, and I was involved when Windows was trying to make their mobile phone. Do you guys remember the Pocket PC, which precursor to Apple's coming on board? That's what I did. Did a lot of high technology. That bottomed out. The world wasn't ready for that yet for a couple years. And I ended up in facilities management. And I never thought that there would be a lot of technology when I came into facilities management. I would kind of think it was boring. I can't tell you how much fun I'm having walking around tying all these different things together. It's kind of like the IT department finally realized that we all exist, right? And they want to help us. One of the good things about the pandemic is HR definitely knows who we are, right? And the C-suite knows who we are, and we think about these things. But what I do is I run around. I'm a facilities technologist. I work for a firm, and we make all this facilities technology just work and plug it together and help people to pick things together. From a learning objectives, I've got my 4 normal learning objectives, blah, blah, blah. There are 2 things I want you to take away. First is, if you want a smart building, it's really easy to do. You just get a couple sensors and you set them up and you got a smart building. We could argue for hours over what a smart building was if we wanted to. The second thing is, if you look at technology in terms of IoT sensors, you can always do a pilot and you can try them. If you think about it, and if you're looking to change your CMMS system or your space management system or your asset management system, that's a big jump, right? You've got to go, you make a decision who you go with. From a sensor perspective, you can buy a handful, and I'll show a couple here. Do a pilot, see if they work. If they work, you buy more. If not, you go to another provider. So my 2 takeaways today are, yeah, you tell your boss, absolutely we can have a smart building. Yes, sir. And 2, an easy way to do this is to look at a pilot. There are hundreds of IoT devices on the marketplace today for facilities. I know a lot about it. I am by no means an expert because it is simply impossible. There are 3 or 4 new providers every day, and that doesn't count the pieces of equipment that are coming out of a factory somewhere that simply have a different ownership label on top of them. In the presentation today, I'm going to kind of try to be agnostic. I can't be completely agnostic because I can't show examples doing that, but I'm going to show devices from Apple, AirThings, Butler, Disruptive, Estimote, FreeSpace, IDEA, Schneider, and VergeSense. And as they all will have different applications, and we'll look to put them together. You may have seen some of these devices in different presentations, so I sat in on a Carrier automated logic presentation, and they showed both Butler's sensors, which is a thermal sensor to check for occupancy, and AirThings, which checks air quality. So the first thing is, sensors are going to enable our smart buildings. And there's this concept that is overly used called the digital twin, which you've all probably heard. And someone told you that their software was the place to hold the digital twin, and you needed to do a digital twin their way. And that's not the way the world is. Digital twins also are not a new concept. So if you think about GE, they make aircraft engines, right? They simulate the engines before they build them in a computer. They create a simulated type environment. A digital twin is very similar. So a digital twin is an electronic representation of a space or a place. And in our world, we generally think that of like a room, a floor, a building. We might think of it as a campus. We might think of it as the part of the city block we're watching as utilities come in, and then the concept of what's happening in that space. As IoT sensors come on, they are going to give us a big source of data for what's happening within that space. And on the left, I kind of have a iceberg. If you think about it, most of the iceberg's under the water, right? I'm telling you, from what IoT is going to be able to do in facilities, we're just at the very tip of the iceberg. As a matter of fact, the only industry use case that I think sensors are mature right now are for occupancy. And I actually expect the cost to come down significantly because someone hasn't figured out how to make them cheaply in a factory overseas and ship them. But that's just a matter of time. Is everyone in here in FM? Raise your hand if you're a facility manager. If you have a couple minutes, I sit on IFMA's ITC board. We have an annual survey that we do on digital twins, and I can share that at the end, but that's a barcode for it. And I'm trying to get people, we got lots of responses from AEC professionals who had all sorts of ideas of how this should work. I'm trying to get more facilities people. We're having a random drawing for $100 for a gift card. It's 10 simple questions. And when I put this together, as I talk about digital twins and different perspectives, in my career, I've had a big exposure to Autodesk and what they're doing in terms of AutoCAD and Revit and building information modeling and that. When I took the concept of the survey to the IFMA ITC board, I put together the survey and I gave it to the rest of the board and I said, what do you think? And they said, Peter, the survey is absolutely terrible. And I said, why? And they said, the survey is all about building. And as you think about a digital twin, you've got to worry about what's going on in your facility. You also worry what's going on outside your facility. And the survey that we did this year, our sponsors included Autodesk, Schneider, Esri, Planon. I actually can't remember everyone. But my point being, there's all sorts of technology going. The picture at the left, I'm going to talk about, give credit to certain things, is a piece of marketing material from Butler. Butler has thermal sensors that will sit up on the ceiling. They're actually kind of cool. I wish I had one. They're battery powered and they're magnetized. So they're easy to stick into a drop ceiling. And they'll sit there and they'll take a thermal image. As I talk about all of this smart buildings thing, there's a tremendous amount of money going into this space. So raise your hand if you're familiar with the term IWMS. So an IWMS, for those of you who don't know, is like the big daddy of all facility software systems. It'll manage your space, your work orders, your leases, it'll manage everything. The 12 major IWMS players have all been purchased or been bought by a venture cap within the last handful of years. What's interesting as you look at that and some of the acquisitions, some of them are by building control companies. So Schneider bought Planon about 3 weeks ago, Paul. FM Systems was acquired by Johnson Controls. 2 weeks ago, Paul works with Nuvolo, who's an IWMS provider. They were bought by Trane. And Siemens did not buy an IWMS provider, but they bought a work order management system called Brightly that has 85% of the school district. You've heard of Brightly. And the reason why I'm telling you this, all these players all of a sudden are coming in, and I can point to $2 billion in acquisitions that have happened in the last 2 years. At the same time, there's all these other things that are going to help us. This is my iPhone. There is no reason for this to cost $1,000. There's electronics and stuff in this, including LiDAR, that's going to help us with indoor positioning. And during the pandemic, I had the opportunity to do some work with Apple with their indoor positioning program. And where they were back, what was that, 3, 4 years ago, I set up a mall down the street for me. And my daughter wasn't very happy because I could know where she was in the mall within 3 meters. Technology like that's going to move forward. One of the things I always say, when's the last time you went to a hospital and you actually didn't get lost, if you think about it? I know I always get lost when I'm in hospital. The other thing that's happening in this space also as we think about it and we talk about indoor location, it's also done by looking at different disturbances with waves. Cisco has the corner on the market for routers and Wi-Fi units. Cisco is quietly rolling outside all sorts of facility stuff. And as I talk about this, what I want you to understand, there's all sorts of technology coming, and when I talk about the phone providers, they're trying to figure out a simple use case of where someone is. And what's two of the biggest problems in facilities? One is, where am I? And what do I need to fix where I am, if we think about it? And conveniently, someone's working on solving that for us. I still think we're a couple years out, but it's coming. So I want to talk about networks for a minute. It's nothing new. We're all networking. I am a big Lord of the Rings fan. Used to read it every year. This is a shot from there where they lit the beacons right on different mountaintops to kind of let people know what was going on. And if you think about networks, it's really a protocol of how to communicate. Networks traditionally required lots of wires. So 20 years ago, I did a project at the National Library of Medicine within the National Institutes of Health. And we hooked up humidity sensors to the work order management system. So if the humidity sensor went off, it would indicate that there was a leak, which isn't good in the library, right? It would kick off an urgent work order, and we knew where that device was. And as we think about it, there was a wire connecting all of that. As we talk about IoT devices, all they are simply sensors without wires. And I remember initially working with the client when someone came in and said, hey, let's do some new wireless technology. He was talking about it as if it's all new. And I was like, no, it's just a humidity sensor. The only difference is it doesn't have a wire attached to it. The nice thing about not having wires is there are signals all over the place that we can use as we think about different ways. So we could use Bluetooth. We could use Wi-Fi. Raise your hand if you've got a Ring doorbell. I don't. You hook that up with your home Wi-Fi, right? From a Wi-Fi perspective, typically IT isn't going to let a sensor provider run inside a facility, so some providers will put up proprietary networks. Other things that'll happen, a lot of equipment now ships with cellular built into it. And part of the whole movement of 5G isn't just so we can download things quicker, but all of these devices can start talking to one another. And then there's also the concept of a gateway or a hive or a hub, which I would call a proprietary network. And this is an example of one here. Okay, so right now I plug this in. It's got a 4G signal, and it's connecting to something up in the cloud, and I'll put some sensors together with this. And in this case, it's kind of a proprietary network. What's nice about some of the gateways or hives or hubs is that they'll work at different frequencies. And if you can work at different frequencies, you can cut down the battery life. You can cut down the battery usage. If you cut down the battery usage, you can cut down the amount of battery that's needed, and you can make a smaller device and it's less expensive. And this is all coming together very quickly. So this is interactive. I put my backpack somewhere here. So I wanted to show you two things about technology. Apple came out with their thing called their little beacon, right? The Apple little thing. So I've got one on my backpack. And it's over there. I can play a sound. And when it came out, that's what it could do. Now, I can do something else. I need a volunteer. Anybody, please? No volunteers. You'll do it? Come here. Although you already know where it is, if you press the find button, start walking, it'll tell you where you are. Give it a second. Do you have an hour yet? Of course this isn't working as quickly as it should. Yep, he's got a little arrow, which is telling him if he's getting closer or further from the backpack. And when these devices ship from Apple, remember when I told you there's stuff in the phones that we weren't ready for? Well, initially, just ping the thing and know where it is. Now, with the higher operating systems, you can actually get some more information. Thank you, Clinton.
Right. So what's in the backpack?
It's a little,
AirTag.
it's called an AirTag from Apple. And it's basically a beacon. A beacon's a Wi-Fi device, which I put online with a lighthouse. A battery in it. It basically says, yeah, I'm here. haven't seen these, they're pretty cool. They're this small, and they're powered by a coin cell battery, so you can replace it. And these cost, I think, $25. And I'm going to show you the predecessor to this in a couple minutes. But my point is, they're all things you can do. Also, as you talk to the sensors, talk to the networks or gateways, you can either have the sensor talk directly to that hub, or you can have a sensor talk to a sensor, where you can have a signal bounce off one another. So there are all sorts of topologies, all sorts of ways to do things. Usually, you'll do one of the three to the left, the Wi-Fi, the cellular, or have some type of gateway which usually has different Wi-Fi signal in it, or a cell signal. So the other concept I want you to understand is sensors aren't old. So who at their organization has key cards for people to come in the door? Right? There's either an RFID chip in that or near field communication where you go up, it's tied to John Doe, right? And you can go up and you can go into the door. This has been around, let's think about how long have we had this? 10 years, 20 years? I've been only using them for 10. I'm not sure if they're longer than that, but the point is, it's not new technology. And in that card is the little piece of electronics where you're going to some reader that's doing something. That technically is an IoT device. We didn't call it an IoT device 10 years ago, but if you think about it, it is. One of the things I like to talk about are occupancy sensors. We are headquartered out of New York. As I talk about sensor adoption, occupancy sensors have reached a level of which I would call maturity. Most of them sit up on the ceiling. The one that I'm displaying there is from Schneider. It looks a little bit, if you think about it, like your home fire alarm on purpose. Okay, and you sit these up on the ceiling, and there are two types. There's an optical one, which will take a grainy picture of what's beneath it, or you could have a thermal one, and the example I talked about early was with Butler. You also could have something that's simply a motion detector or a counter to kind of go over a door, and it might not know where people are, but it can say, hey, there are however many of us in here. We could put a sensor right above the doorway. It wouldn't necessarily know where we sit, but we know that we're here. As I talk about innovation, as you guys are sitting there, you're underneath a table, your body generates heat. So there's a company called Disruptive Technologies that took a temperature sensor, wrote an algorithm, they stick their sensor underneath the desk, and they calculate occupancy by the thermal temperature. And as I talk about this, I gave you there 4 or 5 different technologies that you can work with this. As I talk about occupancy sensors, if I can advise you for one thing, read the directions. A couple nightmare stories. Generation 1, they had a problem where if something wasn't working, the system didn't realize it. So a couple years ago, we did a project because one of our clients put sensors all over the place, and no one was in the office apparently. And we compared it to the badge scan data, and we realized that a couple of the sensors that was broken. We're kind of at Gen 2 of sensors. Sensors will now send an update back to the system to say, hey, my battery's low or I'm okay, and things run. Another project that we did was a nightmare. Most of the ones that go up on the ceiling, you can't put them on 20-foot ceilings. They're for standard ceilings. So someone put them up on 30-foot ceilings, and the sensors didn't work. And as a result, they needed to come in, take them all out, get poles, install the poles, reinstall the sensors, and walk away. There are other types of sensors. This is one from a company called FreeSpace, which kind of goes under the desk, and it picks up the motion. And it will say a person's there based on that. So it wasn't this company, but another company. They had done the install, and whoever did the install took the devices and installed them backwards. So when someone sat at a desk, there was no reader, and someone needed to go back and pull them all off. So when I talk to you about the importance of a pilot, we've seen failed implementations. Please do a pilot, and it's a good way to kind of put your toe in the water. Indoor air quality became kind of a little important or a little more important during COVID, right? We thought about air exchange and what's coming in and out of the building. There is a whole host of air quality sensors that are coming out. Europe is a little ahead of us. But long story short, there are all sorts of studies that point to, you know, it's good to have good lighting, it's good to have good space around us, but the air quality affects how we work. Another type of sensor is biometric. Most of you probably aren't using these. We'll see these at like military installations or really complicated labs. But as we think about it, it's just another sensor type to take information, allow to know where someone is, and let them through. Another type of sensor, and there are a whole host of these, and vibration was the example that I picked, where you can buy sensors and put them on existing equipment, and it will tell you things. So if you take a vibration sensor and stick it on an HVAC piece of equipment that isn't running smoothly, it'll send you a trigger and let you know when something happens ahead of time. Room booking panels. Room booking panel goes and it tells you who's sitting there, right? No big deal. The room booking panels, as they're evolving, a lot of them now will have where you'll check in either with your key card or your phone to make sure that you're having the meeting. And if that doesn't happen, it will automatically release the space. And that's a company called IDEA, and I feel bad because I left a couple things home, and that was one of them. I was going to bring one of those devices. I had mentioned disruptive technologies earlier. That's an example of water sensor. Water, as we know, can cause a hell of a lot of problems in facilities. I have a wired water sensor in my basement. The last one I kind of wanted to talk about was a beacon. So about 12 years ago, I was at the IFMA conference in New Orleans. And someone talked about this thing called an iBeacon, and they held up something that looked just like this. And it had a little wire and an antenna on it. And they said, this is going to change everything in facilities. And I wasn't sure what it was at the time. So a beacon, similar to the device from Apple, kind of just says, I'm here. So this is about 7 years ago. This was cutting edge technology. Bluetooth, battery life of 3 to 5 years. The battery no longer works because if you shake it, this light should go off, but I'll tell you it won't work. Apple worked with these guys 7 years ago. Cutting edge 7 years ago, 3 to 5 year battery life. Cutting edge at Apple 2 years ago. Look at the size, look at the difference. And in this case, you can replace the battery. So as I talk also about what's happening in this world, there's all sorts of innovation happening, which is good for us because the more innovation that happens and the smaller the sensors get, the less manufacturing materials required. And the smaller they are, the less battery is required. So again, you could have a smaller battery in the device itself, and the battery life lasts longer. And this one I've had like 3 years, and if I check on my phone, it says the battery's low, and this can be replaced with a coin cell. I should stop, I'm sorry. Has this been helpful for anyone? Any questions? Oh, I've left you all speechless. Yes, Paul?
So with all these changes and advancements in technology, pilot, rollout, etc., where do you put the stake in the ground, and how do you plan for obsolescence?
In 3 to 5 years, whatever you have will be obsolete. The technology's moving that quickly. So some of the companies, as you look at them, actually will not sell you the sensors. They will rent you the sensors. And then they will replace.
Not that one.
Sorry. This is just a shell, thank God. They'll replace them at some further point in time. And sorry, I kept my notifications up. Oh, they're popping up here, but not there, which is good. So going completely off facilities, I asked my marketing coordinator, I said, get me some weird use cases for sensors. So apparently in Romania, there's the world's first smart forest. They had a problem that people were going and cutting down the trees. So they put some noise sensors, acoustical sensors out in the woods. They know where they're located. When the acoustical sensor goes off, it sends a trigger. The park ranger knows where the sensor was and what it was triggered, and they know to go out and see who's trying to chop down the forest. Pretty interesting use case. I have a forest behind my house. I hope we don't have these in everywhere, but it's kind of off the wall thing. An interesting thing, Ring, all of you who have Ring devices, as I talk about acoustical things and things can be done, do you know that if a gunshot happens, Ring will let you know there was a gunshot? Yeah, I unfortunately learned this because 2 blocks over, a young man was troubled and committed suicide. About 2 years at my house. What was interesting, though, was the whole neighbor was in an uproar. I didn't have a Ring device, but 2 of my neighbors ran over and said there's a gunshot somewhere, and we were all trying to figure out what happened. But if you think about that, there are devices that can tell different types of gunshots. So universities, for instance, will buy devices that will grab an acoustical signature and it'll tell you what type of gun was shot. If there's an active shooter situation with a machine gun versus, a single shotgun, you kind of think there's a little bit of a difference. Another use case that has nothing to do with the price of tea in China, making beer. So apparently, you can use IoT in beer. I learned with this case study, when you have too much oxygen, the beer doesn't taste as good and the shelf life isn't as good. So they got some sensors in the process to test the oxygen. And then they had a problem with spillage at this brewery. So they got some cameras in the manufacturing process to see how high things were filling and cut them off in time. The end result is the brewery saved money and people that drink beer are a lot more happy. I don't drink beer, so it really didn't affect me. As I talk to you, I'm doing this live and not everything works. So this is the one thing that doesn't work. So very interesting use cases as we talk about facilities. There's a company that I've done some work with that has a rat trap, which is Wi-Fi enabled, which is enabled. The good news is it worked in New York when I left. The bad news is it won't find the 4G signal here. But you take a battery pack, you plug it into the device, there's a SIM card built in this. Remember when I said earlier all that 4G, 5G stuff that AT&T and Verizon and all the providers invested in wasn't just for that. You take the rat trap, got to make sure it's positioned correctly. You snap it in, it's now a smart rat trap. What's really interesting about this thing, and I had this all set up, you can see I was ready. I bought a physical rat for my presentation, but if you do that, it'll catch it. The bad news is I can't show you that working live. The good news is I can show you. I really need to know that. Sorry about that. If I pop out of my presentation for a minute.
Is that also an acoustical signature of squealing?
Just give me a second. Got to re-log in. I integrated this with Plan-On, which is a work order management system. And when I was fooling around with it back home, you can see that different work order notifications got sent to say, hey, the trap was sprung without a catch. It could tell you that the trap is sprung and it's uncertain if there's a catch. And you can say, hey, we've caught a rat. Interesting use case. Personally, I think a little overkill, but it shows an example of kind of how far you can go with these things. One of my, and as we look, I can also show here, you can see here's my rat trap. I called it test. And over here, and here, as you can see, something's not working. It didn't hook up with the 4G signal down here for whatever reason, for which I apologize. Yeah, so usually, and I'm going to demo a water sensor in a minute. So disruptive, which I'll demonstrate their water sensor. I like disruptive. This is a Scrabble tile. This is a disruptive sensor. So a year ago, this was cutting edge. These are actually printed And I like showing them. Anyone an Office fan, by the way? I am. I like showing disruptive because it's kind of keep it simple, stupid, and it's something that I can explain. But these are as small as a Scrabble tile. And I've got some Scrabble tiles up here if you want to see. They're really cool. They're so small, they're printed. You can't replace the battery in them. The battery lasts for 5 to 15 years. They haven't been around 15 years, so I'm not 100% sure they last that long. But they're supposed to last that long. And basically, one of the reasons why they last longer from a battery perspective, they go at a different frequency, and they'll ping the hub. The hub is either connected to a 4G signal, or this can be connected into your regular Ethernet network. So and generally, these cover about 10,000 square feet. This is the old generation. The generation 2 do 20,000 square feet. However, that kind of sort of assumes open space. And in a place with lots of pipes and whatnot, things do not generally transmit as long. Yes, sir. This is a water sensor.
It's a water sensor.
Yeah. So come here. You want to see a water sensor?
So what if you spit on it? Does it activate if you spit on it? It should activate.
It'll activate if you spit on it.
Question is, how long does it take to dry and kind of go back to?
That's a good question. All right. So if I'm going here, I'll show you this work live. You can see this dashboard that I'm on. We can see that there's no water detected right now. Drop it in the water. You see that the water's detected, okay? And then within this, you could then send a trigger to your CMMS. I've got an urgent work order, someone's got to fix it. Most of the sensors from Disruptive, which they have humidity, water, touch, and proximity, are all waterproof. The humidity sensor has a tiny hole on it, which is up here somewhere. It's over here. Where's the humidity sensor? And then you can do certain things, asking before, like this is a range extender, which goes in a refrigerator. And this is a range extender where you can drop the little thing inside. But I like talking about Disruptive because it has several use cases. They have this starter kit. It costs a whopping $679. And you can play with, get 5 sensors. Or you can pay $999 and you can get a starter kit with 10 sensors. And it's a way for people to kind of start fooling around with it. Yes, sir.
So, just for perspective, I've got this Simply Safe system, this Gen 3 system. It's nice, but it's not nice. I have a brick house with one layer of brick. The 2.4 gigahertz can't go through it.
Yes.
Yeah, I have a doorbell. It's 6 feet from the router. And there's a steel door. And it has trouble with the upload, the signal. What? I mean, do these things work? How close do I have to have the hub to these?
You've got to have the,
Finding stuff doesn't
yeah,
work.
you've got to test to make sure they're different. Remember when I said there are all sorts of options?
Yeah.
You're going to want to find something with a stronger hub and a larger device with a larger battery that will send out a stronger signal.
Okay. So it's not the 2.4 gigahertz, it's the device maybe that doesn't have enough power?
It could, well, it's how far the device is from the reader per se,
Yeah,
if you
6
think
feet.
about it.
Can't go through a steel door.
No,
And it can't go through a brick wall.
no.
It's 4 inches of brick. and it
So
can't-
in that case, you've got to put one on each side, a sensor, a gateway.
You have to bore a hole through the building.
Ye-
And you have to put an antenna out there.
Yes.
That's all I know. Is that where we are with the technology? Is that bad?
It's not that bad, it's catching up quickly. Waves can't permeate solid objects to a certain level.
Got it, but
Another way to say this, the technology, though,
Yeah.
is maturing.
yeah.
It will never be perfect.
No, I get that. But I'm just thinking, I'm in a mechanical room.
Yep,
I gotta have a hub in the mechanical room that's plugged into a hard wire to get down the hall.
yes,
Okay?
if you're going to put sensors down
I
there.
just need to know what the expectations are. And I gotta learn that, I have to know what they are so I can help the people I consult with know what they are, so we can manage them.
Yep.
Okay, got it.
And as I talk about sensors and a maturity level, and I said this earlier, the occupancy sensors as a class have reached a level of maturity, but if you also think about it, they're covering office space,
Yeah.
which doesn't have a bunch of walls in the middle.
But it's got these devices,
Yes.
and then it'll work. And it still has value. I'm
Yes.
not saying that.
And then as we talk, there are also still a lot of wired devices. So a lot of the occupancy sensors, because of the amount of data that they're going, are wired. And the other problem you have with the counting sensors, if you're in like a university setting and you've got people constantly coming and going and they're battery powered, the battery will run out quicker than it's expected to. You had a question, sir.
I was just going to mention, I have 30.
No, one of the big use cases, so it's not I'm in the kind of corporate world, but disruptive is selling all sorts of sensors to landlords for that reason, with things like that. So other things I can kind of do with this, and I kind of jumped off my PowerPoint, you can see I sent an alert to myself saying there's a leak, and here it comes. There are other things you could do is I could send an email, which when I demonstrate software, a certain software vendor, I don't want it to kind of be software agnostic, but in this case, it can send a trigger to someone, which could be a work order that sends a leak. There are other interesting use cases if you look at it. So I put a proximity sensor in this first aid kit. And if I go back here and I pop open the first aid kit, the proximity sensor goes off, which I just triggered. And I can see here, it's open, okay? And two things happen in this case. I'm sending myself an email saying that, hey, the first aid kit was open, but you could set this up to do other things like, thank you. That was my marketing coordinator. She got the email as well. And if you put something like this on an AED device, wouldn't it be nice to know for security that, hey, the AED defibrillator in this part of the hall was pulled when seconds matter. So there are all sorts of interesting use cases kind of as you look at these different things. The other thing I like about Disruptive, just as I talk about it, their goal is to sell sensors. Most sensor companies have a lot of analytics, particularly the room booking sensors, which I mentioned are very mature, and I'll talk about them a little more in depth. From a perspective, Disruptive focuses on their API. They want to sell sensors and kick off a trigger and go somewhere else. So they're kind of different approaches. Going back to the iceberg, we're just at the tip. So I talked about leak detection. Wanted to talk quickly about occupancy. I'm going a little longer than I expected. And indoor air quality and activity-based cleaning. So I had mentioned earlier that occupancy was very mature. These slides I grabbed from a company called VergeSense. VergeSense was one of the first companies to get major market share, and they've got a very good system. And as you know, we're all moving to this nice shared space, right? VergeSense, I've got one of their things here. It's an optical sensor, okay, here. It does matter. Remember when I talked before about making sure things are installed right? This is on one corner, not on all four, so it does matter how it's mounted. VergeSense does their own installs, so the nightmares I talked about earlier you wouldn't see with them. But having an optical sensor, they can do things that a thermal sensor can't. So VergeSense has this interesting thing called signs of life. And they can pick up a backpack, a water bottle, a computer, or a jacket, because people aren't at their desk all the time. So if you think about the use case of a thermal sensor, if someone leaves or a temperature sensor under the desk, it's not going to work. And this will go back to my concept, not all sensors are perfect. You can kind of point out a different thing with them. But if you look at this, we can see, hey, this is how we're doing in terms of our occupancy. You can see that, you know, you've got your passive occupancy, your active occupancy. The other thing that this is used a lot in conference rooms to see how much they're being used. As people are coming back, we all know certain people are hogging the conference rooms all the time, and it is able to release. From a maturity standpoint, I say that the occupancy sensors are really at Gen 2. Gen 1 was, okay, where's John Doe sitting? Gen 2 is how much time is John Doe spending there, or how is this space being used, or how is this conference room being used, and there are all sorts of analytics that go into that. Example of another company, not VergeSense. This one is a company I worked with called FreeSpace, and this is one of their sensors. They go under the desk, and then they've got infrared ones that go up on the ceiling. They did a pilot project with a large insurance company they're redoing all their space. Perfect time, by the way. They're doing a hub and spoke type model where they're going to have major offices and minor offices around them. And in one of their first facilities, they bought all new furniture, which I was not involved with, and put in a little bit of technology, and they weren't sure about sensors at the time, so I sold them on a pilot. They used the sensors in a pilot. They also used the room booking panels from IDEA. The pilot for them was very successful. As we came out, it was interesting. They realized that they had huddle areas which weren't necessarily conference rooms, but places that people could congregate. One of the things they realized that people were utilizing those areas more, so they need less conference rooms in the rest of the build-out, which was not something they were expecting. I also learned some really interesting things as a workplace technologist, like if they had lactation rooms and they put the room booking panels in the lactation rooms. Well, when you make a reservation, it says Jan Doe makes the reservation. We needed to modify that room booking panel so it wouldn't show that Jane Doe was in there because it was an HR violation. But interesting things kind of as you look at things. I talked earlier about air quality. AirThings is probably the leader in this space. They've been around the longest. There are all sorts of particulate matter, and people work better with good air. Also, most conference rooms were not designed with thinking, hey, how many people are going to be in here? And I love it when people talk about air quality because I'm one of them. I'm asthmatic, so I'm a little more sensitive than most. But you ever sit in a conference room and you start to get really tired, and it's not the fact that someone's boring you, the fact that the CO2 is building up in there. One of the things that I think is terrible about all of this, though, is the bar scene is going to be completely ruined for my kids once this happens, because you're not going to be able to have packed bars anymore. Because if you get a lot of people, you have that. But one thing that Cognizant did, AirThings did an implementation at Cognizant, which had some problems with some smells, and they initially were looking to deal with the smells, but when they set things up, they found out that people worked actually more efficient. As I talk about all these sensors and this data, you can take an AirThings sensor, put it on a floor, and know roughly how many people are on the floor. And as we talk about AI and all these things, there's this rule of thumb. If you have good data, someone will write an algorithm to figure things out. So one of the things that AirThings did about 2 years ago, they took occupancy sensors that would track where people sit and set up their sensors on the floor to sense air quality. And they found, like, within a couple people, they could be pretty accurate how well the floor was, how many people were on the floor, which is just an interesting, it's a completely different way to look at the data, but to come up with something very different. Last thing I wanted to touch on was the concept of activity-based cleaning. So I could take that proximity sensor, I could stick it in a doorway. I laugh when you go see the cleaning log things because usually they were like filled out 5 days before and the bathroom looks terrible whenever I see them. But you could do a counting sensor, which just sits in the door jamb, or you could have one above the door, and you could clean based on your activity. As you look deeper into this, if you start to merge this with other things, during COVID, there was the whole point of activity-based cleaning with the sensors. If you knew where people were sitting, you were cleaning the desks instead of cleaning all of them. And there's an efficiency ratio to that. If you take occupancy sensors and you start utilizing room reservation systems and you tie the two together, in places like New York where I am or Chicago or city bases, we know that most people come to work Monday, Wednesday, Friday. So some of our forward-thinking clients that have reservation systems and good sensors will not turn on certain floors on Monday and Friday, and people will have to check in on certain floors, and as they get full, different floors will be open. And you get kind of three benefits from that. From activity-based cleaning, you don't have to clean whole floors if you think about it. You also can turn up or down the HVAC, which is saving you money so you're green. And then the other thing you get from a personnel perspective, you don't have 4 people on a city floor plate because it's Friday and no one wanted to come in. I'm sorry I meant to finish earlier. I'm close to the end of my time. I meant to leave some time for questions, but what I wanted to do today was kind of give you a broad overview of a bunch of different technologies that were out there, understand how they can be applied, and if you walk away with one thing, I just want to leave you with the concept. If you look at these devices, pilot them. It's really easy to pilot them. You can get a couple and you can see how they work. Well, I laughed. I was on the phone, emitter there in Germany. I was on the phone with them this morning, and I'm going, it worked in New York. Any other questions? All right. Thank you.